What if one incident could change the course of history, disrupt the environment, and impact humanity for generations to come? Imagine a calamity so profound, its ripples are still felt today, 4 decades later. This is not a scene from a dystopian novel, but the chilling reality of the Chernobyl disaster. A nuclear catastrophe that unfolded in the heart of Ukraine, leaving an indelible mark on the world. Today we delve into the enigma that is the Chernobyl disaster. It was an ordinary day at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, or so it seemed. In the heart of the Ukrainian SSR, nestled on the banks of the Pripyat River, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant hummed with the ceaseless rhythm of progress. April 26, 1986, was a day earmarked for a safety test on the 4th reactor. The test aimed to simulate a power outage to ensure the reactor's cooling pumps could function on emergency power. But as the day unfolded, a series of unfortunate events began to align like a cruel constellation of disaster. The test, initially scheduled for the daytime, was postponed until late evening due to demand for power. This delay resulted in a different, less experienced crew handling the procedure. The test began with a reduction in power to simulate an outage. But due to design flaws in the reactor and a lack of understanding of these flaws, the power dropped to an unexpectedly low level. This unforeseen drop created unstable conditions within the reactor. As the crew struggled to increase power, they unknowingly pushed the reactor into an even more precarious state. The design flaws of the reactor were compounded by human error. Confusion reigned as alarms sounded, warning lights flashed, and the crew, not fully understanding the reactor's idiosyncrasies, made decisions that exacerbated the situation. The reactor's safety systems were intentionally turned off to continue the test, a grave mistake that would soon have dire consequences. As the clock ticked past midnight, tension hung heavy in the control room of reactor number 4. The crew, unaware of the disaster they were hurtling towards, continued their attempts to salvage the test. And then, at 1:23 a.m., reactor number 4 exploded. In the aftermath of the explosion, chaos ensued. As the dust settled, a surreal reality dawned on the city of Pripyat. A catastrophic nuclear accident had just taken place, but it was met with an eerie silence. The Soviet authorities were in a state of denial, refusing to accept the magnitude of the disaster. Instead of immediate evacuation, they kept the city's residents in the dark, exposing them to lethal levels of radiation. The night shift workers at the control room were left in a state of bewilderment. They could not comprehend what had happened, and reports of the explosion were met with skepticism and disbelief. The authorities were convinced that a reactor could not explode. They assumed it was a minor incident, perhaps a fire in one of the turbine halls. The denial was not just ignorance, it was a refusal to accept the unthinkable. While the officials were wrapped in denial, the brave firefighters of Pripyat were the first to respond. Unaware of the invisible enemy they were confronting, they marched into the heart of the disaster. These men, clad in their standard firefighting gear, were woefully ill-prepared for the onslaught of radiation. They were fighting a fire that was unlike any other, a fire that was silently sowing the seeds of their demise. The city of Pripyat, once bustling with life, was now a ticking time bomb. It took a full 36 hours after the explosion for the evacuation order to be issued. In those critical hours, the city's residents were exposed to high levels of radiation, their lives forever changed by an invisible and silent killer. This was the immediate fallout of the Chernobyl disaster. A city in chaos, officials in denial, and brave men walking into a death trap, all against the backdrop of the world's worst nuclear catastrophe. The world was oblivious, unaware of the disaster unfolding in a small city in Ukraine. The world was oblivious, but the worst nuclear disaster in history had just begun. The radioactive cloud from Chernobyl did not respect borders. These words reverberate with the chilling reality of the disaster. The radioactive fallout from the explosion at Chernobyl spread far and wide. Carried by the winds, it contaminated vast areas across Europe, turning them into ghost towns. In the aftermath of the explosion, the radioactive particles drifted towards the north and west of the Soviet Union, blanketing parts of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. The fallout didn't stop there. It crossed sovereign lines into Scandinavia, making its way as far as the United Kingdom, leaving a trail of contamination in its wake. This wasn't just a Soviet problem, it was a global one. Countries as far away as Japan detected elevated levels of radioactivity in the atmosphere. The world was watching, and the world was worried. The international response was swift and decisive. The International Atomic Energy Agency, or IEA, was at the forefront, deploying experts to assess the situation and provide guidance. The United Nations rallied its resources to offer humanitarian aid and support to the affected areas. Yet, the Soviet Union, in the throes of Cold War paranoia, initially attempted to keep the disaster a secret. It was Sweden, detecting alarmingly high levels of radiation, who sounded the alarm. Faced with mounting international pressure and undeniable evidence, the Soviet authorities finally admitted to the catastrophe on the 28th of April, 2 days after the explosion. The Chernobyl disaster drew a stark picture of the dangers of nuclear power, prompting a global reassessment of nuclear safety standards. It thrust the environmental cost of nuclear energy into the spotlight, spurring debates that continue to this day. But perhaps most significantly, it highlighted the futility of borders in the face of a shared threat. The Iron Curtain, the symbol of division and isolation, was rendered meaningless by the invisible enemy that was radioactive fallout. The disaster at Chernobyl was a grim reminder of our shared vulnerabilities and our collective responsibility to protect this planet we all call home. The Iron Curtain could not contain the invisible enemy that was radioactive fallout. Chernobyl is a name that echoes through time, a stark reminder of the power and danger of nuclear energy. This disaster has left an indelible mark not just on the landscape, but also on the lives of millions of people and the course of history itself. The health effects of the Chernobyl disaster have been far-reaching and long-lasting. The immediate aftermath saw a spike in acute radiation sickness, with 31 fatalities. However, the long-term impact has proven to be even more devastating. Thousands have suffered from thyroid cancer, a direct result of the radioactive iodine released in the explosion. The World Health Organization estimates that around 5,000 cases of thyroid cancer in children and adolescents can be attributed to the disaster. The environmental impact has been equally profound. The surrounding area, now known as the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, has become a radioactive wasteland. Despite this, nature has shown a remarkable resilience. Wildlife has returned to the area, thriving in the absence of human intervention. The socio-political implications of the disaster were immense. It highlighted the dangers of nuclear power and led to widespread protests and a re-evaluation of nuclear safety standards worldwide. The disaster was a major factor in the downfall of the Soviet Union, as it exposed the regime's shortcomings and sparked demands for greater transparency. In the face of this catastrophe, efforts to contain the radiation and mitigate the damage were undertaken. The most significant of these was the construction of the new safe confinement, a massive steel structure built to encase the damaged reactor and prevent further radioactive leakage. This monumental feat of engineering stands as a symbol of humanity's resolve in the face of disaster. Today, the ghostly remains of Pripyat stand as a haunting testament to the disaster that occurred here. Yet in the midst of this desolation, there is a glimmer of hope. The story of Chernobyl is not just one of devastation, but also of resilience and the indomitable spirit of humanity. Chernobyl, a name etched in history, represents a disaster that has taught the world a hard-learned lesson. The dawn of this tragedy was marked by a catastrophic nuclear accident, an explosion that shook not just the reactor but the entire world. The fallout was unimaginable, with radioactive particles spreading across continents, causing widespread environmental and health impacts. Our exploration of this disaster took us through the global impact of Chernobyl. Countries far from the epicenter felt the ripples of this nuclear catastrophe, a sobering reminder of our interconnected world. The effects were not limited to the land and people, but extended to the genetic level, altering the very fabric of life in the affected regions. In the aftermath, we saw the enduring legacy of Chernobyl. The area, now a haunting testament to the disaster, serves as a stark reminder of the potential devastation that can be wrought by nuclear power, when not handled with extreme caution. This journey through the Chernobyl saga has underscored the profound lessons we've learned. It has shown us the importance of rigorous safety measures, the necessity for transparency in the face of disaster, and the irrefutable fact that the power of the atom, while potentially beneficial, can also yield dire consequences if not respected and managed with care. As we remember Chernobyl, we understand the gravity of responsibility that comes with the power of the atom.